Hey there, guys. My crowd. My people. Yeah, what can I say? Army shirt. Doesn't look too excellent, does it? I can put on a cool necklace, which I was going to do anyway. Or at least as long as I manage what with the heat. It's not that bad with the heat at the moment. It's just that it's, I think, the fourth or the fifth time, let me talk properly if I can, that we get some type of a heat wave like situation. And I'm kind of almost fed up with it. There. It looks slightly more decorative, doesn't it? And I can't change any settings on this now that I'm at it. So as long it looks like as long as I face forward, the lighting stays more or less the same. So it's when I look to the side that it tends to go dark all of a sudden, which is weird. Anyway, sorry about that. Travails, because there were travails again. Sometimes I feel like, will this never end? Is it never enough? Or what is happening? Does it have to be complicated and painful and intense and dramatic and theatrical and all that the rest of my life? I don't know. Anyway, what happened? Nothing really specific actually happened outside of myself, other than Saturday evening. Today's Monday, the whatever. Do I know the date? Hang on. I have to do that again. Because what does it say there? I can't even read what it says with my glasses on. Sorry. 26. Okay. That's basically for me that I actually just wanted to see the actual date. Monday 26th of August 2019. And Saturday last evening around 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening or so. Western European time, which is I think Greenwich Mean Time. I had a huge mood of irritation and annoyance, and not even with anything in particular. It's just that we got involved, husband and I got involved in a discussion about politics, yes, and I got way annoyed, and he just kind of needled me, sort of not really on purpose, and I went ballistic. What does it look like when I go ballistic? It doesn't really, I didn't go ballistic immediately. It took me about half an hour or 3/4 of an hour or so. I got so irritated and so PMSy and so high strung to an extent that I'm not used to getting anymore, that I couldn't really calm down anymore. And I was feeling awful. I was feeling like I was in a crisis, and what we had been talking about actually didn't warrant any of that. So weird, you know. I've been looking at the moon phase later afterwards. We did go to bed eventually, normal time. I fell asleep normal, which is pretty good, I think, considering everything. I woke up in the middle of the night, went downstairs for a drink of water and to have a look at the moon phase, or position of the moon at the time, whether I could make any sense of that. And yes, there was a grand square with a couple of positions and some things going on. So maybe that was it, really. I don't know. Possibly. And the next morning, yesterday morning, I was still utterly miserable. I felt so miserable. And that's why I'm documenting this, because this is me. I'm just putting me out there. I was, and I've talked to you about my foster family that I'd contacted again after quite a while, and the soul cards and all that, that was working quite fine. And I didn't, in the middle of the, sorry, in the middle of the afternoon, Saturday, I was fine. As far as I could tell, everything was more or less flowing along normally. So where did that sense of desperation come from at that moment, other than what husband ended up saying was it comes from deep inside of you, and it's been triggered somehow, probably by contacting your foster family again, and up it comes. And like an actual physical visceral memory of being 2-3 years old. I remember now what happened. I actually burnt my hand on a bit of incense that I'd put by my bed. And that's when I started crying, and I just couldn't stop anymore. And it was just coming out in torrents. And that was like by 10 o'clock or so. And completely strung up, completely hyper, completely bawling my eyes out. And at that time and next morning, that's my storyline here, I still had no clue as to what to do with this state of affairs, and or how to make sense of it, how to figure out what to do with this. It was pretty obvious that I wouldn't be able to go on like that indefinitely. That's not a state that you can keep up for. It's exhausting to begin with, but also it's not the way I like to look at my life anyway. So in the end, we got up, we had breakfast, and I started reading a bit, had a coffee, etc. And husband was going to go upstairs to do his books, do his administration, and he just didn't. He just sat with me for a while. And I'd pulled a few cards. I pulled out my Marielle again, and I'm going to show you my cards also because they're quite on point again. It's perfect, it's beautiful. I had pulled the first three, and then the rest of that came about 10 minutes later. So that's just a reminder to myself how I did this, really. I don't remember exactly what it was that he said that got me to realize. He sort of helped me by asking a few very simple questions to realize what it was that I felt, to be able to put a name to the emotion. And basically, it turns out that I have to recapitulate for some of you guys maybe. What happened in my early life was that as soon as I was born, really, I'm from 1966, August. As soon as I was born, the relationship between my parents started to sort of implode. And they didn't really have all that great a relationship, but they made do with each other because apparently my mum managed to provide some type of a support for my dad as she was. And having the child come in between them, it's been said before, and it's been problematic before, hasn't it? And my dad didn't take it out on me, he took it out on her. And he started really getting narcissistic and quite semi-violent to cynical and unpleasant all of the times to her, which freaked her out, and then everything went, downhill from there very quickly. The other thing was that we had moved house already. By the time I was 3 months old, my parents moved with me to Somalia in Africa, in the east of Africa. for a year because he had a job there, some type of work. And coming back after that year, we stayed in Holland for a short while, I think a few weeks or maybe a few months possibly. And we then moved to Switzerland, where we lived as a family in two different locations. One in a really high-rise apartment that was, I suppose, sort of affordable, normally priced at that time for them. My mother was already getting into quite a state of depression at that time. So by the time I was 2 years old, that's what I had around me, a woman who was really depressed. And so I've been trying to find, yes, and that's another theme that's really relevant that I've been wondering how to sort of present to you guys again and encompass and get talked about, because it doesn't get talked about enough on YouTube, is second and even third generation I'm trying to avoid the word victimization, victims after Holocaust and or concentration camp survivors. So the people who are the children or the grandchildren of concentration camp victims, okay, their psychology, the patterns that they grew up with are not hardly at all talked about on YouTube that I have found so far. I think that's a big deal because the one reasonable-ish type issue that explains why this isn't talked about on YouTube so much is that a lot of what is popular on YouTube or what's happening on YouTube is really American in origin. I'm talking about the continent. And so, of course, obviously, I'm also talking about the culture. There's a certain level of attempted, I think, Americanization happening on television on the European continent. Yes, to different extents depending on which country you're looking at. And this is a European problem to a large extent. However, of course, there's innumerable Holocaust survivors and family members and descendants from them in the States as well. Where are they? And why isn't there any sense of this is not only your problem? And so I'm actually sort of trying to think aloud also, because that's also what I do, you know. My mother was in Indonesia in a concentration camp for 4 years, from 8 to 11. And she already wasn't really all that healthy. So it's a bloody miracle she survived. And the Japanese had internment camps around several places in Indonesia, where she was born to a colonist's family, Dutch, complete Dutch white, Belanda is what they used to say, white-skinned and white-cultured teacher's daughter. That's what she was. Her father was heavy-handed with her, had beaten her badly several times before the war. I'm not sure how often it happened, but he was vicious with her. And that was insane, which I still think the only sort of an explanation, not a justification, but an explanation that I have for that is that he was beaten himself with the belt buckle over his back, probably when he was a tiny kid, because I got one photograph of him as 4 years old or so, and he looks just as scared as she did. So they were really skewed people already, and then the war happened. Okay, so I have to tell you all this in order to explain to you how I felt Saturday evening and Sunday morning, because it's all one lump. It's the whole thing is one lump. And I'm trying to extract from the emotional and personal perspective, I'm also sort of putting other emotional and mental and intellectual perspectives next to and around that, because gives a bit of support in the end. Sometimes that works. So my mum was a really strong person in many ways, and she was also really flawed and really a lot of pain all of her life. So my dad was from Jewish descent, and even though his parents didn't get sent off to the camps because his mother, my grandmother, was a white Aryan, supposedly, woman that my Jewish granddad, was married to, still my dad got sent off to some type of a foster family as a kid. Yes, there's the term foster family again. That I've never heard him talk about. But then again, my parents divorced when I was 7 years old, and I have not really spoken to him at all ever about his childhood or how he grew up or any of it. There's lots of information that might have come in handy for me to make sense of everything myself, basically, also. So the point that I'm trying to make, also sort of embedded in my personal story, I will get back to my personal story after this, okay? Because to me that seems to make sense at the moment. The point is that when in the Netherlands, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, I'm saying we here because I don't know anybody else other than I have a few friends really who have similar experiences, who also clued me in first as to that a lot of the things happening that I interpreted as personal and exclusive to myself, that they're actually a lot more common. There's traits to that situation of how you grow up, okay? Common traits, events that sort of everybody in this situation when you're a kid from these parents with these memories, with these unresolved traumas, that's what you get. The thing that first springs to mind, that certainly was my situation, is that instead of being the child in the relationship with your parents, you tend to have to be the parent. You are being not necessarily put on a pedestal, but you are put in a position of clang and bang. Yes, it's the builders. It's going to be going on for at least a week. Like so. I can just sit here while they do the talking, I should have waited with recording this until the middle of the afternoon. By the time they will probably be done and gone, maybe. I didn't. So you get put in a separate position. You're not really ever, I was never really in the position of a child, of someone who's supposed to be learning about things gradually, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and so on. Gradually, one step after another, one game at a time, developing whatever skills you may have, whatever, in a state of innocence, in a state of safety and security, in a state of having actual people to go to with questions or problems or, little conundrums and what have you, at whatever age. And my case, my growing up, was an extreme version of that, it turns out. I have never seen myself as the child of abusive parents. I've always assumed that what I went through was more or less normal for me, and that they were not. My dad was, of course, a bad man, because my mum was victimized by him, and she, I think nowadays, and I've looked at astrology over and over again, and I've seen the structures there and the character and the properties there that make her into as much a partner in that relationship as he was. It wasn't like he did all the bad things and she was completely pure and innocent and flexible and placid, and her go-to mode was passivity, and that goaded him and drove him crazy. I think that's one of the ways that things went wrong between them. So I've got the full package. I've got abusive and weird parents. I've got the fact that we moved house a number of times, and that didn't stop with the divorce. It went on afterwards, ever and ever, going on and on. And hidden in amongst all the external things that you could actually see and find, practical ways to deal with or whatever there was the history of the camps and all that, and there was one video. I'll stick the link in the description if I manage to remember to do it. There's one video that I found, 5 minutes, of a woman therapist, an American, I think, who actually talks about children growing up with Holocaust survivors, and what that looks like. And in her case is not my case. She describes people talking about other people who are absent, people who are gone, in a way that is very unfeeling. And you had to, her message is basically that you had to be tough in order to survive, and that's the message that was imparted to her as a child as well. They left you to figure it out on your own. Now that bit I can relate to no end, because my story, to get back a bit more to my own perspective, and also in the course of things I will point out maybe some more survivor stuff, that's in there. Not only did I have to support my mother rather than that she supported me, that was always the case, but that was especially the case after I was like 10 years old or so. By the time I started growing up slightly, she just left an enormous amount of time. Then again, this was before the information age, so we had a lot more time to hang around and basically do whatever we liked than in those days. But I never thought of any of this as anything else. I knew it was a weird life, and it wasn't like I had to constantly I didn't have that many people to compare things or to compare notes with either, because so we were left in Switzerland. My parents divorced. I got squatted with my grandparents on either side for a while, and then they decided that I should stay with this foster family for as long as possible. And then my mother kidnapped me in the February of 1974 from school in the middle of the day, with a friend that she managed to find with her car, and we had to, legal issues, blah blah, and so on and so forth. And I was by then 7 years old. I went to, finally my mother got custody of me, and I went to live with her, and nobody ever asked me what I wanted. Whereas with the foster family, on the contrary, I had actually found some relative peace of mind, which was like stunning and almost traumatizing by itself to me. And to get back at that, to get back at those memories and get back at those emotions, has been like a kind of worms, Pandora's box opening for me in the past year, because everything changes. These types of memories breaking open, all your perspectives on life just get toppled upside down. So this is more or less also recapitulating in order to get back to this emotional moment that I'm actually surprised that I still have to go through these things. And then again, I'm also kind of glad that I do, because apparently it's how I work, how I tick, and if it's there, then of course it needs to come out. Okay, The people that I grew up with never trusted anybody else, so that's what I grew up with. That's definitely a survivor trait. Never trust anyone, never be vulnerable, certainly not. I had no clue. And every second generation camp survivor has these same traits, the same fake, almost boisterous cheerfulness, like they're not going to get at us. They're not going to, you know, it's sick, basically. So, yeah. Anyway, I think that's enough about that. Afterwards, we moved with my mother and I. Basically, it was just my mum and me. Then after that, all contact with basically my family was severed. There has been one birthday party that I remember, mine, where there were a few relatives around, and somehow my mother decided that she needed to keep in touch with her father, who had been on my dad's side in the whole divorce drama. So she was angry at him all of her life for his, I still think, bonkers perspective that she should have taken it, whatever my dad did to her, and shut up, which is of course bonkers and not of this world really. So there was all that as well. There's a lot of misogynistic general stupidness going on. Then again, if my grandpa was beaten by his mother, what's she gonna say? You can blame him. You can go on blaming him forever. Anyway, we moved house several times within the Netherlands. We moved to the south of Spain, to France, several locations. I went when I was 18 to live with my grandfather for a few years to Amsterdam in order to study. That's where I met my husband. And there's a motorcycle out front now, making a ton of noise. I don't know what's with people, but they're making noises. I'm going to pause this for just a slight moment in order to get me a glass of water and for the motorcycle to go away. Yes, we are back. So the theatre of my life growing up has been sort of made the survivor story, the survivor patterns made really obvious because of moving house all the time. If you had the same type story, but then in some type of surroundings, some town, I don't know, anywhere here, where you wouldn't move house all the time and you would at least have a lot of other acquaintances, relatives, friends that you would be able to see and visit regularly growing up, right? I did not even have that. All I had was my grandpa. So that's why I went to live with him when I was a student, when I wanted to go study. All this is basically background material to the events of last weekend. And what I kind of figured out was that in my personality, there just isn't room for that level of struggle that there was between my parents. And what I've come to realize, I did some journaling after I finally got the clue of what I was supposed to be getting here with all my feeling miserable and pain, this pain constantly. What was the pain about? The pain was about being pulled apart because part of my cells wanted to be with my dad and the other part of my cells wanted to be with my mum. And they were at constant war with each other, and they were later on also using me to get back at each other. And it wasn't, that part of it wasn't really all that obvious, except it was constantly unpleasant. And that's enough to drive me crazy. And what I've realized is, you will find on my channel a number of videos about soul retrieval and all that, is that actually I had to go outside of this life in order to find a sense of self that didn't have anything to do with either of them. And that's like, okay, so it's sort of, if you like, proves that there's been an actual soul retrieval experience happening. You know? Maybe I should... I will get back to this. I will probably try on again and again to explain this to some, level that I am going to be at least somehow comfortable with these notions, because it's different perspectives, right? There's all these there's this perspective, and there's my own personal perspective behind this face and this voice and these words. There's a whole lot of stuff sort of fueling this the whole time. And most of that is my day-to-day, 53-year-old self who likes fig trees and my garden and my cards and food and just generally being, this type of thing, beads and things. So it's really weird for me that I actually had this rather big realization yesterday that for me to have half a chance at having half a sense of a self, and I think it's half a sense because there's so much more going on here that has to do with this potential past life that I had to access. It's almost like this. It's almost like my higher self, or whatever that is, parked the parts of me that were most sensitive and most emotional and most engaging and most reaching out to people and most capable of knitting itself together with other people in order to get things done, be strong, have humor, have joy together. I parked all that in the 14th century. All of it. I parked my heart in the 14th century. You. And then I sent the brain part and the whatever, the motor skills and some of that on to incarnate in this body, to get born in the Netherlands to those two. And then here I am. What with investigating all these things and getting driven over the edge again and again by people that I thank for that, really, because there was no other way, I suppose. I really suppose there was no other way, was there? To regain contact with that part. It's really weird. It is utterly weird. And regaining contact means, I suppose nowadays I actually have full contact with that part of myself, in the sense that I am sort of integrating all this sense of being together, but it's still alien material to me now. So, because it actually feels like there's 600 years in between, that part of consciousness has lain there, and I have had half a century to develop my own ways of doing things, and they are meshing. And so what happened during the weekend was really my getting a strong sense of how conflicted my parents were actually, which is of course what you experience when you're 2 and 3 years old. You get the full package. You have no filters, you have no boundaries, you've none of it. And all you want to do is care and engage with these people that are your parents. And I don't know whether, if they treated me kindly and treated each other kindly and everything had been fine and dandy, whether the whole soul retrieval wouldn't have been necessary, or whether it just wouldn't have happened. And I would not have, definitely not have found, in the end, you know, after all these years, the need to go to these lengths, to dig my way through via regression and soul perspectives and all the rest of it, which has in the end given me incredibly deep and satisfying experiences. Like, I still have to make a separate vlog about the House of Titian that we visited, which is a 15th century house, I think, where I did some type of a little bit of an earth meditation, and this insane bubble of time opened up, and it was really beautiful. It was really beautiful experience. We'll get to that somehow, eventually. But this is just, I am giving a couple of perspectives here, I hope. Okay, so the final perspective on this lengthy tale is my cards. I drew cards at first. Okay, here we go. Here we go again, because I forgot to turn off the sound. Because that was before the holidays and it's a month ago. And it's husband calling, and then you get these beeping noises. Sorry. Cards, okay? Marielle. First set of 3. Queen of Swords, 3 of Cups, and King of Cups. Pretty obvious representation of the whole of the story that I just told you. But I wasn't really satisfied with this. I felt like, okay, so this is my mum and this is my dad, and the 3 thing is my story of searching. One waterfall follows one person, the other waterfall follows the other person, and the third waterfall, the thinnest on this picture, would have to be my own then. Except I didn't have any of my own. I didn't have any perspective. I didn't have any sense of self, because my mother was a pretty dominant person. Here are more cards for her. The 5 of Pentacles, discs, and the 5 of Swords. Such a beautiful deck. On point. Queen of Discs. This is Taurus that I'm talking about, my mother. Completely. Sorry. I should have done that. Hang on. Okay, now the sound is turned off. It's such a mess. Third set of cards. My dad. Magician. 7 of Wands. And Knight of Cups. So that links up with the King of Cups, right? Magician, definitely, because he liked to bamboozle everybody. That was his... and the Knight of Cups also being a total dreamer. I'm not completely sure what to make of the 7 of Wands, other than isolation to some extent, and considering himself to be always at odds with everybody. Definitely. So those are his cards. And then I had a really strong emotional reaction to this one. These are my own cards. Knight of Wands. Hallelujah. Yes, my favorite chosen, top favorite card other than the Sun. The Ace of Discs, the Ace of Pent. Oh, and this is the one that has such a strong reaction to. Page of Cups. So I am the child of both of them, okay? But I'm also this. And there's a lot more that can be said about this. and about the soul process, which I will have to do some serious meditating in order to make sense of this whole soul thing. Because yesterday I sort of, at the end of the afternoon, I sort of came to the conclusion that there is two ways that I can go about. What I feel like is that the identifications that I had through this painful process that I went through, the identifications with both my parents are kind of dissolved, or at least the strings are dissolving. Okay? Doesn't mean they're completely gone, but I don't need to please either of them anymore. And I am sort of, through this painful experience of them trying to tear apart each and every cell of my body, trying to own my ass to the exclusion of the other guy, which is what happened, on top of all the rest of the shit and all the moving house and nobody around to help me and stuff. It's a wonder I'm still here, don't you think? I think so. So I have two choices how to go about this from a meditation training consciousness type perspective, the Shakti or the soul perspective. And that's a different story. So I am probably going to work with the soul perspective because the Shakti perspective is inside this body as well. And then you would have to travel the earth in the spiritual world, so to speak, searching for signals or traces of that same Shakti energy, because I am assuming here, this Shakti energy is shared between incarnations. Isn't that cool? It's a possibility, but it sounds like more work, whereas I will probably using some type of a less personal soul perspective. It's less personal, but it's not impersonal, okay? It's still me, only it's not affected by glands and powerlessness and struggles and all that. I might be able to actually home in on the signal immediately, because of course I want to know where all that 14th century stuff really happened and then go there and visit, because that sounds like a really exciting plan. More drama to follow. So if you manage to listen to all this, that's awesome. And I thank you. And I will be talking again to you pretty soon. And it looks like I'm not completely red in the face because I haven't done any crying today. I did enough crying for a bit. And I'm still laughing and I'm still talking and it's still happening and it's still alive. So thank you for watching, you guys. Thank you so much and see you again soon. Okay? Bye-bye.